Hey, welcome back to Love Fashionably, the podcast. I'm so excited that you have joined me again on this Monday night. I know everything looks completely different, and you're like, wait, are you still at BGTV Studios? Yes, I am. I'm so excited. We have another set that has gone live, and this is kind of what I always envisioned for our podcast, just to kind of be more like a home setting. We've got my little tree over here and fancy TV picture behind me, where it just kind of feels like we're sitting together in a living room chatting about life and looking at it all through God's lens. And so I am so excited, and always a very special thank you to BGTV Studios that allow this podcast to happen each and every week. And so it's always such a blessing. And so thank you to them. As always, and just a little reminder, you can check out bgtvstudios.com. There is a list. This is a podcast network, which means that there are podcasts that happen all throughout the week, several on Monday night, and all, again, Monday through Thursday, I think, but the schedule is always changing. So definitely just check it out there. There's some other resources that you can see in addition to the show listing that kind of tells a little bit of the story, and also if it's ever placed upon your heart to give, then there is a way that you can help support BGTV Studios. And if you just want to drop a word of encouragement to me or the studio, just because this has been a blessing to you, then definitely check that out as well. So, as I mentioned, I am very excited about this kind of new setting and environment. I feel like it'll be a bit more relaxed for us, and something that I'm very excited to be talking about tonight. So I am going to be sharing about one of my favorite Bible characters. That's, I guess I should put like a little star, asterisk, whatever you want there. That's not a woman. That probably kind of gives it a little bit more away, because I have mentioned that I love Esther and Ruth, but today we're going to talk about Joshua. He's one of my favorite all throughout the Bible, because I love his example of faith that he carries. I know a lot of the times we hear Joshua, we think be strong and courageous, and so like mighty warrior, but really it's his faith that kind of carries him. And so I was kind of asking the Lord the past couple weeks. And so last time you might remember that we talked about just being sick and tired, because I was kind of talking and trying to figure out like what people needed to hear. And I just kept hearing the word tired, like everyone's just tired. And then as I was kind of thinking about tonight, I just kept feeling like faith. And I really kind of feel like this generation's really lost a lot of their faith. And kind of the sense that, yes, we know that God works all things together for the good in Romans 8:28, but people now would just kind of rather go out and make it habit and then add the tagline, well, thank God that you did this for me. But really, they kind of played more of a part than God did. A couple things that kind of brought to my mind were like, it used to be back in the day, like, you had your plan. You go to college, you get your degree, you have a good job, and that can sustain you. Well, now it's like you have to have a backup plan for your backup plan. Like you have to have like your degree, and then you have to be having like multiple streams of income, and like you have to have all these things just to keep you busy. And kind of instead of just relying on the provision of God and his faithfulness through that. Something else that I kind of see, just kind of, I guess, for a lot of people that are in their 20s and 30s, I'm not saying which one I'm in, but I feel like dating apps are at like an all-time high right now. And I feel like a lot of people just, it's like there's no longer this weight or this faith in that God can place the people in your life when he needs to at the right time. But they just feel like they've got to go ahead, and everything's like so sped up. You just got to hurry up and just kind of like make it happen, or just kind of be out there doing all of these things. And, I feel like that's kind of taking it out of that faith realm. I heard one of my friends, I was talking to her about it, and she said she literally had her phone in her hand about to download an app, a dating app, and she heard the Lord said, so you're literally going to take this into your hands, and out of his. And I just feel like, and disclaimer, if that's what the Lord's telling you to do, then do what the Lord's telling you to do, for sure. But I know just for me in my life that's just something where I know that I'm supposed to trust him, and that he has a plan, and he knows the whole story, and he can place people in my life at the right time when it's supposed to happen, even though I may feel like he's running really late. I just feel like that there's a faith there. I want to just kind of start off with a couple of definitions. So obviously in Hebrews 11:1, it describes faith as the confidence in what we hope for and the assurance in what we do not see. I wanted to also look it up just in the Webster Dictionary, and it said the first word was just belief. Faith was just belief. And then it said an assent to the mind to the truth of what is declared by another, resting on his authority without other evidence. And so, for Joshua, faith was everything for him, because everything that he had to do had to really come from a place of faith and trust in God, and what that he had done in his life, and just kind of what he had said, because that's what he moves off of. And I was listening, I've been listening to this song for probably about the past year, and I really love the opening line of it, and I really feel like it's a really strong statement of faith, and this is what faith is. And it said, may I be like Mary, and it's talking about Mary, the mother of Jesus, open to the movements of your heart, blessed in the keeping of your promise, a faithful friend of God. And we could probably just start right there, that's a very good summary of faith. It's just open to the movements of God, believing in his promise, and then just being his faithful friend. But for the sake of the podcast, we'll keep going. I'm going to talk a little bit. So kind of going back. So if you don't know anything about Joshua, you may have forgot. So Moses has Aaron, but Joshua also becomes a very good assistant to Moses. And we know that, spoiler alert, Joshua becomes the one in command after Moses dies. But when they leave Egypt and they go into the wilderness, it's kind of where we pick up where Moses, this is right before he gets the 10 Commandments. In Exodus 33, verses 7 through 11, it kind of tells what Moses does in the wilderness. He says, it was Moses' practice to take the tent of meeting and set it up some distance from the camp. Everyone who wanted to make a request of the Lord would go to the tent of meeting outside the camp. Whenever Moses went out to the tent of meeting, all the people would get up and stand in the entrances of their own tents. They would all watch Moses until he disappeared inside. As he went into the tent, the pillar of cloud would come down and hover at its entrance while the Lord spoke with Moses. When the people saw the cloud standing at the entrance of the tent, they would stand and bow in front of their own tents. Inside the tent of meeting, the Lord would speak to Moses face to face as one speaks to a friend. Afterward, Moses would return to the camp, but the young man who assisted him, Joshua, son of Nun, would remain behind in the tent of meeting. And so I had heard that, and one time I just kind of asked God, I was like, why was Joshua always staying behind? Nobody else was. What was the point of that? And I just kind of felt like he was saying that he stayed there, and that God was testing his faith. So in the wilderness for 40 years, God tested Joshua's faith so that when he got to the promised land, he was able to activate his faith and have the walls fall and the sun stand still. And those are the two main things that we're going to talk about today. As I mentioned, there comes this next. So you don't really hear of Joshua anymore. It kind of goes on, and you hear the rest of Moses' story. And then in Joshua 1, that's where you hear, it's very abrupt. Now Moses is dead. Now Joshua. And it's a very quick, sudden change of power. We talked a little bit about before on here about I like to watch The Crown. And one of my favorite moments in that very first season is when Queen Elizabeth's father dies. She, without even knowing it, she doesn't even know that she's become queen yet because she doesn't know that her father died. But there's an instant and a transitional moment very quickly of transitional power, where when the king died, she automatically becomes queen. And that's what happens here. Very quickly, very suddenly, there's a transition of power. Moses is dead, now Joshua. And so we know that they're still in the wilderness, but it was his promise to take them into the promised land. That's what God had commissioned Joshua for. And it never really, I don't know if you've read Joshua 1, but it always really confused me, when I used to read it, because at the very beginning, within 3 verses or 4 verses, God says 3 different times, be strong and courageous, be strong and courageous, be strong and courageous. And I never really understood why. I was like, of course Joshua's strong and courageous. He's about to lead all these people into their promise. They've been waiting 40 years. Why wouldn't he be strong and courageous? And it's probably because Joshua was a little scared, because he had a word from God. He had a promise from God, but he's probably turning around looking I really hope that this works. Did I really hear right? Am I really doing what I'm supposed to be doing? I don't know if you've ever felt like that. I feel like that a lot of the times. Did I hear that right? But that's where faith comes into it. So God's just, again, confirming to him, just be strong and courageous. Be strong and courageous in me and what I've told you and who you are, and that all of this time has been preparing you for this moment. And so there's that transition, that major where they cross over into the promised land, and we could go into that because I do love that part. For the sake of time, we won't. But so there's that moment where Joshua was one of the 2 spies that initially went and spied out the land. He came back with a good report. Everybody else, besides one other person, came back with a bad report. They stayed in the land. This time they get a good report. They enter into the promised land. And the first thing that meets them when they enter into the promised land is a battle. So you would think they've been in the wilderness. They've been fighting to survive pretty much. And you would think, oh, now we get to go enter into this land of rest and peace and this big comfy chair. We're just going to kind of sit back and prop up. We might watch a little TV, I don't know. They were just, probably not expecting a battle as the very first thing when they enter in, but that's what they get. They walk up and there's the walls of Jericho. And the walls weren't there to keep them out. Not to let them in, but to kind of keep them out, because the people were afraid of them. They had heard what God can do. And so they, it says in Joshua, we're going to be now in chapter 6, verses 1 through 5. It says, now the gates of Jericho were securely barred because of the Israelites. No one went out, no one came in. Then the Lord said to Joshua, see, I have delivered Jericho into your hands, along with its king and its fighting men. March around the city once with all the armed men. Do this for 6 days. Have 7 priests carrying trumpets of ram's horns in front of the ark. On the 7th day, march around the city 7 times with the priests blowing the trumpets. When you hear them sound a long blast on the trumpets, have the whole army give a loud shout. Then the wall of the city will collapse, and an army will go up, everyone straight in. So, again, when Joshua walked in, the first thing he saw was these walls in the battle, but it wasn't a battle with the sword. It was a battle with the trumpet. It was a battle of Joshua's worship. And could he worship his way into his promise? And so, again, Joshua gets this promise from God, and now he has to walk out in faith, because faith is action. And so now he has to walk it in faith, believing that what he heard is how he's going to win this first battle. Now, I don't know about you, but if I heard that, I don't know that I'd be thinking, okay, yeah, that's the right way we're going to do this. He had to walk in faith and believe, because he knew God's voice from the time at the tent. So he knew that was right. But imagine that. So everybody's kind of set up, and, the marching, it said he only took the fighting men. So imagine, they go off, they do that on the first day, they march around the city, they come back, and you're at the tent, and you're like, oh, how did it go today? Did you make any progress on the wall? And they're like, well, we just kind of quietly walked around at one time and came back. And you're like, because It doesn't look like they've broken a sweat or anything. They're just kind of like standing there, and you're like, okay, well, that's interesting. And so, you know, okay, whatever. And so they do it again, and the same thing happens again. They're like, okay, I guess. I don't know if that's me. I'm kind of like, are you sure you heard that right? Like, are you sure this was God, like, to march and not do a thing? And so even the people had to have the faith in God and the faith in Joshua, that to keep going, even though it didn't make sense, even though it seemed honestly kind of crazy. But it kind of goes like this for 6 days, that same kind of conversation. And then on the 7th day is when everything changes. And so that's when, obviously, we know that the walls fall. Their faith in action from their marching around made the walls fall, and they go in and they take over the land. And so they're able to plunder the enemy's camp, and even though it kind of seemed crazy, that it was really Joshua's faith in action that made this whole situation happen. So then, kind of going from the walls falling from chapter 6 to chapter 10, there's another great story that I really don't feel like gets told enough. I heard it, and it really changed my whole idea on faith and what it was. But so kind of just a little backstory. So they go in, they conquer Jericho. And then they've kind of had a couple other battles since this time. They've conquered another city. And then another city and king has decided to kind of become allies because they're seeing how God is with them and God is moving with them, and they don't want anything to do with it. And so they decide, we're going to become allies. Well, these 5 other kings hear about this. They don't really like it. So they all come together and we're going to go attack the king in the city that became allies with Joshua. Well, this king says the word to Joshua and his fighting men, go, and they all go to help protect this one city that is being attacked. And so in Joshua chapter 10, verses 9 through 14, it says, after an all-night march from Gilgal, Joshua took them by surprise. The Lord threw them into confusion before Israel, so Joshua and the Israelites defeated them completely at Gibeon. Israel pursued them along the road going up to Beth-oron and cut them down all the way to Azekah and Makkedah. As they fled before Israel on the road down from Beth-oron to Azekah, the Lord hurled large hailstones down on them, and more of them died from the hail than were by the swords of the Israelites. We're going to come back to that statement in a minute. On the day the Lord gave the Amorites over to Israel, Joshua said to the Lord in the presence of Israel, sun, stand still over Gibeon, and you, moon, over the valley of Ajalon. Not really sure if I said that right, but we're going with it. So the sun stood still and the moon stopped till the nation avenged itself on its enemies, as it is written in the book of Jashar. The sun stopped in the middle of the sky and delayed going down about a full day. There has never been a day like it before or since, a day when the Lord listened to a human being. Surely the Lord was fighting for Israel. That last part, I love it, but it's a little sad at the same time. It says there's never been a day like it before, and there's never been a day like it since. And we know that we can take the Bible at its word, and I do believe that when God looked throughout all of history and all of eternity, he knew that there would never be a moment like that, in the fact that the sun and the moon would just stop in time again. But I do believe that type of faith we have access to. We may not be able to literally make the sun and the moon stand still in the sky, but we do have we can have that same type of faith. It says in Hebrews 13:8 that Jesus is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And so I do believe that same power, we have access to that same power, even though it may look different for us. And, again, like I've mentioned, and just to kind of back it up in scripture, that faith is action. In James 2:26, it says, just as the body is dead without breath, so also faith without good works. So as we saw there, Joshua had to put in the work to go. He had to go fight these people, and it says they did avenge their enemies with swords, but it said that God threw hailstones from heaven, and he killed more. He avenged more enemies than the Israelites did. And I loved that picture because it just shows that God is working on our behalf more than we are, a lot of the times more than we think. That yes, you have to go through the faith and trust God that you hear him, and go through the action and the process of it all. But in the end, behind the scenes and even above the circumstances, God is working and he's moving and he's doing more for you and avenging more, even if you don't feel like it. He just wants to see, we talked about last time how God is wanting a partner. He wants to partner with us to carry out his plans. And it's the same here with your faith. He wants to partner with you to do this, but he has, if you allow him, that to be, and you allow yourself to be that faithful friend, then, he's able to do abundantly and immeasurably more than we can ask or think or imagine. But you do have to get your hands dirty a little bit, and the fact that you're going to have to battle it out. Maybe you have to battle it out in prayer, battle it out with your words versus what's in your mind, to believe God. So like it said, just to kind of go back to that quote at the beginning where it says to be like Mary, just to be open to the movements of God's heart. So trusting him, listening to him, trusting him, and moving in his time and his ways. And we do that just very simply by, like it said, to becoming a faithful friend of God. Well, how do you do that? Well, you build a friendship. We talked a couple weeks ago about how to have a godly friendship with other people here on this earth. Well, it's the same thing. You have to build a relationship with God. You have to spend time with him. You have to talk to him. And there's, different ways you can do that. A lot for me is through prayer and worship. That's just how I like to do. Spend time and listen. And so, obviously, reading the Bible and scriptures, he opens your minds to new things and he can show you ways. So I encourage you, if you are not already do that, maybe you need to up it a little bit more. Maybe there's something that you're going through and that you feel like you need to have that faith for that last or next step, just to kind of trust him, trust what you've heard, even if it may sound silly like Joshua and you may have to be marching. Maybe your first battle is not with the sword, but it's with your worship to fight through what God is asking you to do. So I just encourage you to know that God's presence is near and that you are hearing his voice, that he is always speaking. It's most of the time we're just too loud. So we have to quiet ourselves to listen to him and then to follow him with that stand still kind of faith. And so, again, some battles are harder than others. Some are easier. But again, we have access to that same type of power that Joshua did. And so just want to encourage you and just give us the courage and the patience to wait and to follow you and to move in your time and in your ways. And to have that sun stand still, Joshua taking down Jericho kind of faith. As always, thanks for joining me here at Love Fashionably. It is always so great that we get to spend time together every week. This is a weekly podcast, so it goes live every Monday night at 7 p.m. You can find us on Facebook or YouTube at BGTV Studios, and I look forward to talking to you more next time. Bye.